Greetings and welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you could be here. Before we begin, please take a moment to hit those like and subscribe buttons. It all helps feed the hungry algorithm. And while you're at it, maybe go ahead and check us out over on Patreon. Lots of cool stuff going on over there. The address is at the top of my YouTube page and in the video description. And, before we continue, a quick shout out to my Tier 4 patrons, Russ of the Frozen North, New5AC, and Nick. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now, on with the story. Time and Tide, a story by the Casual Deathworlder. Chapter 4, Cost, Part 1. To say that we were in a state of shock would have been an understatement. If you have never lived in a country that has just been defeated militarily, you couldn't possibly understand the shame, the grief, and the guilt that we suffered. Shame for having fought and lost. Grief for the fall of our great city, which had stood for so long. And guilt for still being alive when so many we had loved had perished. Even with food being brought into Katai, there were still those who chose to die of hunger rather than suffer the indignity of living as a conquered people. I was almost one of those lost souls. The enormity of what had just happened was too much to face. My spirit caved inward upon itself. I simply lost the will to live. After a day or two, I stopped even registering what was going on around me. Ata and Anai tried desperately to reach me, to get me to eat, but I was too numb to even try. My days and nights were a disjointed blur of images with no sensation. Finally, one day, I recall hearing someone screaming my name. I came to just long enough to see something so frightening that it shook me back to my senses. The face of the high priest, bright red with rage, and a very large fist too close to dodge. There was a sickening thud, a blinding flash of light, and then darkness. The world slowly returned to me. I sincerely wished that it wouldn't. My first conscious thought was a prayer. Loomis, let me be in hell, because if I'm not, then I have the headache of all time, and I don't think I want to survive it. No matter how strong your faith, eventually you begin to suspect that the gods are deaf. I slowly managed to open my eyes, and my head exploded. I rolled to the side and groaned, but that only ended with my head exploding again, coupled with dry heaves. If you've never had dry heaves before, count yourself blessed. And if you've never had them on top of a concussion, then maybe, just maybe, the gods aren't entirely deaf. As I lay there in my misery, gagging and trying to hold my head together, a great, deep, booming voice, sounding very much like the end of the world, said,
"It's about damn time you decided to wake up."
I don't care what god or demon you are. Please shut up, I managed to croak through my suffering. I'm trying to die as quietly as I can over here. The least you can do is follow my fine example.
"Mind your tongue, girl,"
the end of the world boomed, a little more gently this time.
"Years of war may have hardened you, but you're still young enough for me to thrash, especially for blasphemy."
It's good to see you too, Teata, I groaned as my vision began to clear and the face of the high priest came into focus next to me. My entire universe hurt. After 3 years of fighting, I felt like one strung-out, exhausted bruise, and the polished granite slab I was curled up on only served to make each and every ache and pain that I'd ever acquired stand up and answer roll call. The constant gnawing knot in my stomach popped its head in and reacquainted itself with old friends and relations. I was almost too weak to fight it, But finally, in an effort to mitigate my suffering, I made the mistake of trying to sit up, and was promptly rewarded with a fireworks display that was not to be topped until the Chinese discovered gunpowder almost 10,000 years later.
"Slowly, girl, slowly,"
said the high priest gruffly, catching me as I rolled off the bench.
"You've already had one concussion today. You don't need to be giving yourself another."
He slowly helped me sit up and lean into a corner. I found myself in an unfamiliar room. It was small and windowless, and pretty much featureless, and made entirely of polished granite. 3 torches on the far wall provided sufficient light to read by, provided your head wasn't exploding. I looked back to the high priest. His face was a dark storm cloud of anger, which he was trying unsuccessfully to mask. He turned away from me for a moment, and then he turned back and he had a plate and a cup in his hands.
"I have some bread and water for you,"
he said.
"I suggest you take them slowly. You are going to be a good little girl and eat your dinner, aren't you?"
He said the last with a growl that left no misunderstanding as to his intent. Obediently, I took a small bite of the bread and chewed it sullenly. With a little water, I managed to choke it down, but somehow that simple act of eating again began to reconnect me with my own existence. As I ate, a memory came back to me of the large boulder which had laid me out. "You hit me," I began. "How dare you?" He responded with a look that made me quake to the very depths of my soul. Trust me, you've never truly understood fear unless you've offended a man with that much power and authority.
"How dare me?"
he said, his voice sounding again like the end of the world.
"How dare you? What I did to save your life and your soul. You, however, quit. How dare you? After everything that has happened, how dare you quit now? You, who were to so many the very symbol of our defiance of tyranny. This is how you honor the memory of our dead? By becoming one of them? And you say, how dare I?"
"I didn't quit. We all did," I said lamely. "We surrendered, remember?"
"The king and your Atta did what had to be done in order that some might be saved. That is their sacred duty, to ensure that our people, our way of life, survive any way they can. Somebody had to lose in the end, and the Empire had all of the advantages. We shouldn't have been able to withstand their initial assault the way we were, but we held them off for 3 years. Against all odds and against all understanding, we held them off. There is no shame in the way this conflict ended."
Tears welled up in my eyes, and I resented him for them. I had run out of tears an eternity before, it seemed, and I didn't welcome them now. Somehow I managed to choke them back down, yet I was shamed by his words, and I couldn't bring my face to meet that terrible countenance. He sat down on the bench beside me and continued.
"You also have a sacred duty, young lady. You have a duty to your people. All these people who went through this with you, and all those who died that we might live. Your quitting is like a slap in the face to them. You are third in line for the throne right now. You don't have the luxury of bowing out. What about your Atta? And your friend, what about them? You are all they have left. Would you abandon them so readily simply because you don't wish to cope? That's just too bad."
There was nothing I could say. I could fault nothing that he had said, no matter how hard I tried. And believe me, I tried. He was right on all counts, and I resented him all the more for it. The bread, dry as it was, suddenly seemed to turn to ashes in my mouth. All I could do was hang my head in shame. Still, stubbornly, I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing me admit it. Sometimes even I can't understand teenagers.
"I'll leave you to yourself for a while," he said, standing up and turning to go. "Can I trust you to eat without an overseer?"
I took a slow breath to compose myself and nodded.
"Good,"
he said gravely as he walked away.
"I'd hate to think I couldn't knock some sense even into as hard a head as yours."
I sat in silence for a while, slowly eating. This can be a dangerous thing for a 15-year-old, because for the first time in your life you're left with absolutely nothing to do but think. You are forced, kicking and screaming, to look at your life in the face, to bear witness to everything you have gone through, every action you have ever taken, every word you have ever spoken, every triumph and loss, and you are left bewildered, staring uncomprehendingly down the road ahead of you. And you are afraid. I was afraid. I felt cold. My chest was tight and I could barely breathe. Panic washed over me like a slow, icy wave, and my body began to tremble. Get control, I thought to myself, beginning to remember the tools that had gotten me through 3 years of constant fear. The trembling became uncontrollable, and I was near to tears. Lock it down, I yelled at myself. I couldn't hold on to the food anymore, and the bread, plate, and cup all clattered to the floor. Lock it down! Lock it down! Lock it down! I screamed violently in my head, my rage rapidly beginning to win out over the panic until it completely overwhelmed it. Now I was trembling for an entirely different reason. Only the control learned from years of battle kept me from breaking down completely at this point. With what little strength I could gather, I pounded my fist against the stone bench, hoping that the pain would help me get some grip on my emotions. The rage slowly passed, leaving me choking on unshed tears. But as it passed, I was finally able to lock down my emotions, and lock them down hard. I was cold. I was alone. I was utterly empty, devoid of any emotion. I had locked away the darkness and fear, and I would survive another day. One war was over. Another had begun. The war to rebuild our lives. I would be needed in that war too, it seemed. Another body to man the walls and keep death and ruin at bay. So be it, I thought grimly, as I picked the bread up off the floor and began to eat. It was, after all, the first food I'd seen in a week or more. I will do as I must. If I'd known what fate had in store for me, I would have found a sword and thrown myself upon it. I don't know just how long I was kept there in that room, but I'm certain that it was many days. Time didn't seem to exist there, yet every moment seemed like an eternity. Various priests brought me food and water periodically and sat with me a while. From them, I learned that I was inside the Temple of Loomis. To my knowledge, no woman other than the High Priestess of Aeneas had ever set foot inside this place, not even the Queen. It was forbidden. Out of respect, I stayed in my cell, though the priests seemed to hold no ill will about my presence. I was brought fresh clothes and a wash basin. I ate when I was hungry and slept when I was tired, having no knowledge of what time of day or night it was. When I had the strength to do so again, I walked around my cell. I grew stronger day by day. After what felt like years, the high priest came to see me again. I was half asleep when he came in.
"I'm told that you seem to be doing better.
was the first indication that I wasn't alone in the room anymore. I sat bolt upright on the bench and was awake instantly. "Teata,
Are you ever going to do anything that stupid again?"
he asked. I was startled by the question, but I noticed that his voice and his face didn't hold the same anger as the last time I'd seen him. I lowered my head in shame and said, "No, Teata. It was a mistake. Please forgive me. I will not make such mistakes again." He almost laughed at that.
"Oh, you'll make mistakes all right. You will make monumental mistakes. Mistakes which will lead you down paths of great wonder and great sorrow. As sure as you are human, you will make mistakes. You have a destiny ahead of you, laid down by mistakes. But it is not given to us to dictate our own end. Life is a precious gift, and throwing it away without just cause is an unforgivable sin. Remember that the next time you feel like you can't go on."
"Yes, Teata," I mumbled.
"Then I think it is time you were away. You've been here too long as it is,"
he said, offering his hand to help me up. The high priest, I honestly don't think anybody ever knew his name. Do you know the real name of the Pope? Was a large man, and by large I mean that he was a hulking giant. He stood almost half again my height, perhaps 7 feet or more to the top of his bald head, and was broader across the chest than I could have wrapped my arms around. He had the face of a simpleton, yet I knew the intellect hidden behind that disguise. He could be the most gentle and sincere man you've ever met. Angered, he could be the most terrifying thing you would have ever had the misfortune to encounter. No matter what state he was in, he positively exuded authority. Even the king bent ear to him. I accepted his dishpan-sized hand and watched as my hand was completely enveloped in a vice-like grip. I realized that his closed fist was nearly the size of my head and suppressed a shudder of memory. He lifted me to my feet and led me down a long, dark hallway. There were other cells off either side that were nearly identical to mine. This appeared to be the actual living area for the priests, judging from the fact that there were priests sleeping in some of them. From the hall, he led me up a stairwell that seemed to be extremely long, narrow, and steep. He completely filled the stair, and it made me wonder how he'd managed to get down here carrying me. As we neared the top of the stair, I began to hear singing. It was a strange and alien song, not of the tongue of Katai, nor of any of the religions of Katai. When we reached the top of the stair, and I was no longer stuck behind the high priest, I could hear the song better. It was the most alien thing that I had ever heard, yet it struck me as extraordinarily beautiful. We'd come out into the main sanctuary of the temple, and I could see a group of 50 or so men kneeling as if in prayer near the altar. It was from them that the beautiful alien music came. They seemed to be locked in a state of religious bliss, and from them came the voices of angels. No two of them sang the same song or tune, yet it all inexplicably blended together to create something indescribably moving. Suddenly, it came to me that I'd heard it before. At night, after any assault, such a song could be heard faintly off in the distance in the enemy camp. I'd even heard it at a time or two over the noise of activity during the day. The sanctuary itself was huge, measuring perhaps 250 paces across and more than 100 in height. It was a perfect hemisphere of immense proportions. There were innumerable torches, candles, and braziers burning, illuminating the entire room clear to the top. The wall was covered in a single enormous painting. The bottom 20 feet or so was a giant band of blue sky on which was painted a series of scenes stretching clear around the room. It appeared to be a story, but I did not know what story. Above that, the blue sky faded to dark black, with a positively enormous representation of the night sky. It was one of the largest maps ever created in the history of man, and it was nearly as accurate as any you could find even to this day. Only one other ever rivaled it, but that is a story for another time. Even beyond all that, the first thing in the room to draw the eye was something that was utterly unknown to me. In the precise center of the room stood an enormous sphere made of marble and gold. It stood on a small pedestal, but it was nearly 12 feet across. There were large, irregular areas which were inlaid with gold. I had never seen anything like it before, and my curiosity ate at me. Yet I felt that with people here, silence was golden. As we crossed the room behind the singing men, one man near the back of the congregation happened to open his eyes. His song trailed off, and he stood, turned, and stared at me. The man next to him apparently noticed his friend's silence, looked up at him and followed his gaze, then joined him with an identical stare. More and more voices dropped off, and in a few moments the entire group was on its feet, staring, some even whispering amongst themselves. The high priest noticed the sudden silence and came to a stop, looking back to see what was wrong. The man who had first noticed us stood apart from the group and took a couple steps towards us and stopped. He was draped in a brightly colored cloak, the quality of which I had never seen before. He swung one half of the cloak over his shoulders to reveal an extremely polished bronze breastplate, and I could see that he carried a helmet to match under his other arm. I stared at him in sudden recognition. This had to be the same man I had seen come up to the Lemire 5 years ago. The same man who had delivered the proclamation which led us down the path to war. I had been too far to see his face, but I had only seen one set of armor like that before. My escort moved to put himself between us when suddenly the armored man stood stock straight and raised his right arm, fist clenched across his chest as if in salute. The high priest said something to him in a language that I had never heard before, but he sounded rather testy. The armored man raised his hands in a symbol of surrender and returned to his group. We quickly continued on our way, though I continued to hear whispers behind us until we were out the door. "What was that about?" I asked, when we were clear of the temple.
"They recognized you,"
he said.
"Over the last 3 years you have made your presence and your skill well known to the enemy. They respect you and they fear you, and your friend and I with you. Because you are who you are, they may consider you a potential threat. The enemy has been remarkably civil thus far, but history tells us that occupations usually tend to be uglier than the war. You and your friend need to lay low for a while."
We walked on in silence for a bit as he escorted me home under the mid-afternoon sun. There were Imperial soldiers everywhere. They actually outnumbered the population of this city now. Most of the army was made up of men from the surrounding cities, but there were several groups whose people I couldn't identify. I gathered that the men in the temple were from Atlantis, but there appeared to be men from nearly every civilization in the world in this army. I guess this was a popular war. As we came down the road to my home, we were greeted by an excited shout as an eye bounded into view, scooped me up in a giant hug, and twirled me around. We had both grown in the last 3 years, but Anai now exceeded 6 feet and stood head and shoulders taller than I. He nearly crushed me in his embrace. He was still lanky, but he was very strong. "I was worried I'd never see you again," he said as he set me back on the ground. "How are you feeling? I must say you're looking a damn sight better than the last time I saw you. I thought Teana here had caved your head in." "It's good to see you again, Scamp," I said to him with a smile. Even with the way I was feeling, an eye could still make me smile. We had tried 3 times in the last 3 years to make something more of our relationship. Each time we were so tired that we fell asleep at the first kiss. Once as chance, twice as coincidence, thrice as conspiracy. We left it at that. When the gods themselves say no, even adolescents will get the point. Eventually. We vowed then that we would be the best of friends until the end of the world. If only we had known how true that vow had been. I'm better, now that he's stitched and plastered my head back together.
I had to open your head to put some gray stuff in there,
said the high priest, joining into the conversation.
Yours had apparently all leaked out.
I bit back a remark that probably would have gotten me turned into a tent peg then and there, and we walked on to the house. Anai told me that ours was one of the only houses in the city that was not housing Imperial soldiers. Thus far, there had been very few cases of rape and other abuses from them. While there was some looting, it was mainly restricted to homes and shops that now stood empty because the occupants had all died. In some neighborhoods, all the loot was piled up and burned, believed contaminated by the plague, and the houses burned where possible. To anyone's knowledge, there had only been 2 summary executions. A man who had killed one of the enemy commander's guards while making an attempt on the commander, and an Imperial soldier who had been caught raping and murdering a young woman. Because he had woodworking skills, Anai had been conscripted to work in the shipyard, helping to repair damaged ships. This wasn't too much of a hardship for him. He had always dreamed of owning his own ship someday and sailing the world in it. Anything that got him closer to the sea was fine by him. It was mostly their ships being repaired. Most of our ships had been stripped, cut up, and used for firewood or other lumber needs during the long siege. He told us of another ship that had arrived just this morning, the largest ship he had ever seen. He was stunned by the sheer size of it. He estimated it at 130 to 150 paces in length and nearly 100 in width. It was too tall to even fit under the lemire, so it was anchored just outside the wall. When I asked him about Ata, he seemed to lose his excitement about the ship. Anai stopped for a moment and looked from me to the high priest and back. Something's very wrong, he said, suddenly very serious. I can see it in his face, but he won't tell me anything. It just started after the surrender, but it eats at him more and more each day. It got a lot worse this morning, so I'm fairly certain it has something to do with that ship. Then Teata spoke up with an equally serious voice.
Sometimes there are terrible things which you cannot change. It can sometimes be a blessing not to know about those things until they occur, instead of watching helplessly as fate approaches. Sadly, your Ata does not have that luxury. He is in a position at the moment where he must know everything that transpires here. If you do not know yet, then count yourselves amongst the blessed.
We both gave him looks of profound interest, but he would say no more on the subject. I began to get a very bad feeling about where this was going. We came to the house to find Ata knee-deep in his cups and looking positively miserable. The last time I'd seen him looking so awful was when Ama and Amane had passed away. However, I had never seen Ata drunk before. At least never that drunk. He could barely even look up when we entered. Standing was out of the question. There were 4 empty wine bottles on the table next to him, and he was working on a 5th and making good headway. The priest stepped around us to Ata. He snatched the bottle out of his hands and flung it violently across the room, shattering it against the wall. In an instant, Ata was on his feet. Sort of, anyways. His hands were balled in fists, and he glared at the priest with a murderous look in his eyes. The high priest glared right back at him with an equally violent look. Time stood on its ear for a few seconds. Then Ata swayed a little, then fell back down in his chair, fell through the chair, and ended up sprawled out on the floor and laughing. The high priest looked at me and said with disgust,
Sober him up. When he's sober, tell him I want to see him in my chambers tomorrow at noon.
With that, he turned and left us with Ata, who was now close to hysterics. Ata rolled over onto his hands and knees and was able to bring himself under some semblance of control. He swept aside the pieces of shattered chair and said,
It's broken. Everything. Everything's broken. Everything I've ever touched is broken and come to ruin.
Not everything, Ata, I said gently. You still have us. Not all is lost. He stood up with a startled expression, as if suddenly noticing that we were there, and sat there staring at us for a moment.
Anai,
he said.
Bring us 3 chairs. Maia, get 3 cups.
And I hurried out of the room to find chairs as I gathered the cups. I wondered what exactly he was up to. I wondered if he even knew. Returning to the table, I found that Ata had somehow, from somewhere, procured 2 more bottles of wine and a bottle of something the color of amber. And I returned with the chairs, and we got Ata settled in one. I passed the cups around and watched in confusion as Ata shakily filled them with the amber-colored liquid.
Drink,
he said, then picked his cup up and drained it. I picked up the cup and smelled it. For half a second, I entertained the thought of using it as a weapon against the Imperial soldiers. I had never smelled anything quite so revolting in my life. Seriously, I had lived through 3 years of war, plague, and death, and literally never smelt anything that horrific. Nearly 14,000 years later, I'm still glad that the recipe for it was lost with Katai. And I appeared to have the same reaction to the vile stuff that I did, and was now eyeing it and Ata dubiously. I gave Ata a mildly bewildered look. He couldn't possibly mean for me to actually drink the stuff, did he?
You've both grown into fine warriors, but a warrior needs to be able to drink. We drink to celebrate, to remember, to forget. Now drink.
His tone left no room for doubt in either of us. I took a couple of breaths, gathered my nerve, and drained the glass. The next thing I knew, I was racing for the front door to vomit. The stuff burned like fire going down. My throat attempted to close off to keep the vile contents out, but a moment too late. My stomach immediately rebelled. As I knelt there at the door heaving, I noticed Anai right there next to me, looking as though he had just thrown up his toes. After a few moments, Ata set a bottle down in front of each of us. I looked up and gave him a look of profound distrust, but eventually relented and opened the bottle. I'd never really had wine before. What little I'd had when Ata and Amma had thought I was old enough, just before the war, had been watered down. When the war started, all the wine in the city had been appropriated for medical use, and the few times I had had it then, it had been drugged, so I don't remember much. I pulled the stopper out of the bottle and sniffed it suspiciously. It was a balm to the senses after the assault of the first drink. I gulped it greedily and almost wound up throwing up again. The stuff was considerably stronger than it smelled. It wasn't bad, mind you. It would just take some getting used to. It did, however, succeed in washing the taste of that awful stuff out of my mouth. It took a couple of minutes, but I managed to put my stomach to rest. Then Ata and I helped Anai back inside to the chair. "You actually drink this stuff?" asked Anai, who was looking rather green.
And you will too,
replied Ata as he poured each of us another cup of the amber-colored brew. We watched in stunned silence as he drained another cup without even flinching. I wouldn't have believed it was possible, but apparently people actually enjoyed the stuff.
Come on,
he said.
Drink. It builds character and puts hair on your chest.
He looked at me very drunkenly and then realized what he just said.
Present company excluded. It goes down a little easier if you follow it with the wine.
I had absolutely no intention of being the one to go first this time, so I turned and gave Anai my best "after you" look. "And to think," Anai shot back at me with a wry grin, "all those times I covered your ass and you're going to make me go first? It's nice to know I have friends. I really wish I knew who they were." He picked up the cup, took a deep breath, and drank. His expression was priceless, as he suddenly turned from a lightly green to scarlet and back. He managed, just barely mind you, to keep from throwing up long enough to fumble for the wine bottle and take a long pull from it. As he lowered the bottle, he had a dazed and slightly glazed expression, not to mention slightly queasy, and he put his head on the table for a moment. Atta turned his gaze to me. I thought, what the hell? And I survived, I probably will too. And if I don't, well, I wasn't planning on living forever anyways. Irony is a bitch, but fate is the mother of all bitches. Grabbing the bottle in one hand and the cup in the other, I looked Atta in the eye and swallowed the vile liquid, then almost instantly washed it down with the wine. He had been right. It did go way better that way. My stomach only had a chance to give one premature heave before the wine chased the horror away. I looked to Atta as I felt myself begin to glow and saw a look of satisfaction on his face. I don't remember very much about that night, only a couple of details, emotions, sensations. One of the few things I do remember clearly is what it all felt like. For those of you who have been drunk before, and I imagine most of you have at one time or another, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't, well, the only way I can describe it is, try to imagine feeling like the flavor of sugar. I'm sorry, but that is the best description that I can give. I don't mean merely the concept of feeling sweet, but actually feeling like a specific flavor. Sugar. I remember being dizzy and not feeling very good. I think I remember throwing up a time or three. The last thing I do remember of that night was Atta crying in my lap and begging my forgiveness. I had never seen him cry like this before, not even when Amma and Amane passed away. It scared me a bit. The next day dawned bright and clear. I sincerely wished it hadn't dawned at all. If you've ever had a hangover before, then you know what I mean. If you haven't, then let me tell you of this little joy that the gods created for us. First, it felt as though I'd stubbed my head. I've taken blows to the head before in battle, and they felt like lovers' kisses in comparison. Any sound at all gave me the wondrous sensation that my head had just popped. Movement had much the same effect. Second was the feeling that my tongue needed to be mowed. In all my years, I've discovered very few things that can match that sensation in taste, and I wouldn't recommend that you try. Last, and probably worst, was the feeling that if I even thought about food, I was going to barf up my ancestors. With the apocalypse going on inside my head and stomach, I climbed out of bed and answered nature's call. The birds chirping outside sounded like a flock of pterodactyls circling the house, which made it rather difficult to concentrate on the task at hand. The sun was as bad as everything else. The light felt like someone was driving icicles into my brain. My task completed, I retreated to the house, only to be welcomed by the smell of food. After greeting my ancestors for a few minutes, I managed to make it back to the house again, this time somewhat more prepared for what awaited me there. Atta was at the fire making us breakfast. Atta was a warrior without peer. He was a great leader of men and a brilliant mind. Sadly, he couldn't cook to save his immortal soul. So what awaited me in his pan reminded me of what had just happened to me outside. He looked up from the massacre he was committing and smiled wanly.
"Pour yourself a little more of last night's fun,"
he said in a voice that sounded like death warmed over.
"That should clear your head and your stomach for a while."
I poured a cup of the vile concoction with trepidation.
"Sip it,"
he said.
"You're just looking to take the edge off, not get drunk again."
After gagging on the horrid stuff, I managed to choke out, "Where's an eye?" Atta gave a crooked smile and said,
"The coward took one look at breakfast and decided to take his chances with the slop they feed the work crews at the shipyard. He left about 10 minutes ago."
I looked again at the unidentifiable heap he was cooking up and said, "You call that breakfast? It looks more like something we used to do to the enemy." He smiled and said,
"Under normal circumstances, I'd say fine, you don't get any. But right now, I need your head clear. We have much to discuss today."
"Such as?" I asked. Atta paused for a moment, looking distant, and then said,
"Your present and your future."
We sat and ate breakfast quietly, without a word. It honestly wasn't as bad as it looked, though to this day I have absolutely no idea what it was. Some sort of fish, I think, though after what Atta had done, modern science wouldn't have been able to identify which kind. Atta seemed to be deeply troubled, and seeing him like this made me more and more nervous. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt as if the axe of doom were about to fall. After we had eaten, he sighed, sat back, and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, it was almost as if there was someone else there. I could see a resolve in his eyes that had not been there before, and a sadness that etched lines in his face.
"Maia,"
He said,
"I cannot begin to express how proud I am of you. I watched as you cast your childhood aside and placed yourself between those you love and harm. In the face of horrors that no one should ever have to see, you hung on tighter and fought harder and have become a warrior almost without peer. You rallied the people to fight when seasoned warriors would have fled. Together we have outfought them and outthought them for 3 years. It is because of that very spirit that they allowed us to live and maintain some degree of sovereignty. But the Imperial Army did not simply say, 'Okay, you're done. We can stop fighting now.' There were conditions to the surrender, and they affect you directly. I need you. Katai needs you to be brave once again."
I was beginning to get an odd sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. You know that feeling you get that something extraordinarily bad is about to happen? Yeah, that sinking feeling. "You're beginning to scare me, Atta," I said. "How can it affect me directly other than I'm no longer allowed to carry weapons, and I must be indoors by sundown? Oh yes, and I'm not allowed to defend myself if their soldiers try to rape me." I could see the conflict in his eyes. I could tell that he would rather do anything but tell me what he had to say. Again, that grim resolve descended. I could watch the change come over him. Then he spoke the words that ended my world.
"You were part of the surrender agreement. You and 15 other youths."
I blinked and asked, "You said what?"
"The ship anchored outside the Lumiere is an Imperial slave transport. It's here for you,"
he replied.
"You are to be taken to Atlantis to be a treaty hostage."
My world started to crack. I shook my head and said desperately, "No!"
"You will serve there for 10 years. If Katai keeps the peace, you will be returned to us."
I covered my ears and shook my head harder, trying to will this doom not to be. It was beyond unfair. It was unjust. It was a death sentence or worse. The sailors, the brothels, or the altar. "No, no, 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 no," I whimpered. He continued,
"We will keep the peace. I will see you again. But for now, you need to be strong again."
My world started to crumble. "No, no, 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 no," I cried.
"You sail on the afternoon tide tomorrow."
My world utterly collapsed. all the walls and all the defenses I'd built came crashing down around my feet in an instant. In that instant, fear and worse, rage boiled over, and I did the unthinkable. I lashed out at Atta. "No!" I shrieked, advancing on him. "How could you do this to me?"
Maia, I had no choice,
he said, standing his ground. "Well, I do!" I bellowed. "I'm not going!" I delete here a long string of expletives that followed that have no relevant translation in any modern tongue.
"Yes, you are,"
he replied, his expression becoming stern. "A slave, Atta! You've sold me as a slave!"
"It's not like that. They set the terms. We had no choice but to agree to them."
"Don't hand me that crap!" I slammed my hand into the wall, trying to vent some of the pain and betrayal I felt. "There is always a choice in anything that you do. You could have chosen another girl."
"What? You think I chose you?"
he roared. Atta could be the most terrifying sight when he was angered, but I was too angry myself to care.
"They set the terms. If we hadn't agreed to them, they would have marched in here and put the entire city to the sword. And if you refuse to go, they may yet do so. You are a member of the royal family and my daughter. Like me, you have a responsibility to your people that is greater than any personal or family feelings. You will do this if I have to bind you and put you on the ship myself."
I turned away from him, trying to take all the pent-up emotions out on him. I felt betrayed by the person I trusted most in this world, and believed that he had sold me like a piece of art in the town market. After everything we had been through, after all we had heard through the years about the Empire, I could not believe that he had actually agreed to such terms. I felt my heart die and sink in my chest. The ice that filled me must have covered my eyes when I turned back to face Atta.
"You hate me, don't you?"
he asked in the barest of whispers. "Of course I hate you," I screamed. "I never want to see you again. I hope you rot in hell for what you have done. Trust me when I say you will never see me again. You are not my Atta. You are dead to me."
"So be it,"
he said in a resigned voice.
"Just remember what brought you to this place."
The pain in my hand calmed my anger enough for me to breathe as I stomped out the door. I put my fist deep into the wood, signing my goodbye in blood. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been Time and Tide, Chapter 4, Part 1. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and smash those like and subscribe buttons down below, and perhaps drop us a comment. It all helps feed the algorithm. And as always, the very first shout out goes to my buddy Gregor. Thank you very much, buddy. Not only for doing this, but also for putting up with me and the mangled mess that I tend to send you. Thank you. So this is the last half of what I have written of the story. I don't know if I'll continue it beyond the second half of this chapter. It doesn't seem to be getting any traction, but I just wanted to get some work of my own out there, see how people reacted. But it was worth a shot. He who dares wins or fails. Now then, question, who's got the question? Okay. Where do you see us being in 1,000 years? Do you think mankind will still be around? Will we be starbound? Or at least multiplanetary in this system? Or will we have regressed a while? Leave your answers in the comments down below. In the meantime, be safe, be well. I love you all. See you next time.